Hello everybody, Pascal here from Neutrality Studies, and we have news on the proposed meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Yesterday there was still an idea out there from the American side that it would be a trilateral meeting with Mr. Zelensky, or that a trilateral meeting would follow a bilateral meeting, and by now we know more about this. And yesterday I couldn't really believe this news yet, because we also didn't have clear confirmation from the Russian side, but oh, what difference a few hours make, because yesterday around noon in Moscow time, which is the evening over here, we then had confirmation from the Russians, among others from Mr. Ushakov, a direct aide to Vladimir Putin. So here is the readout as it is posted on the Kremlin's homepage. We had a very brief encounter between him, Mr. Ushakov, and Russian media, in which he confirmed something very important, that is the offer that there was an offer from the American side that he says is quite acceptable to us. Now, Mr. Ushakov was directly involved in the talks with Mr. Witkov, and there is now all of this debate: who initiated this idea, who requested what kind of meeting. And the American media yesterday has been very, very quick in claiming that it was in fact the Russians who want a meeting. To me, it seems quite clear that that's not the case. Alexander Mercouris on his channel on the Duran actually made also the point that this would be kind of ridiculous. I mean, why send Mr. Witkov to Russia, to Moscow, to have a 3-hour talk with Vladimir Putin in order then for Mr. Putin to request a meeting with Donald Trump? The most likely scenario is that it was the American side asking for this. We will go into this for one more point in a minute, but I would like to use this program here to discuss 5 pivotal questions about this meeting, because it is the first time in 4 or 5 years that actually the Russian and American leaders are proposing, even just proposing, to meet. Now, I think the most important part is, first, we do have this prospect of something that was offered to the Russians, at least they're saying so, and this readout by Mr. Ushakov that I would like to go through with you in detail, because this is, to me, the most trustworthy kind of account of what also the Russians are willing to publicly display about the summit meeting. So, aide to the president, Yuri Ushakov, says, this meeting took place in a business-like atmosphere, and he's talking here about the meeting between Mr. Witkov and Mr. Putin. And it was quite constructive. Both sides can be satisfied with the outcome of this conversation. The discussion focused on matters dealing with future efforts to work together in the context of resolving the Ukraine crisis. Once again, it was noted that Russia-US relations could be placed on a totally different, mutually beneficial footing, which would be in stark contrast with the way these relations have evolved in recent years. Well, that's quite a way of putting it. I would like to point out that he says the conversation was in the context revolving around and in the context of the Ukraine crisis, but that they dealt with US-Russian relations. So this might be quite important to give us also a hint on what the Russians are currently might want to achieve also with the summit meeting. It might not be, in first and foremost, the end of what they call the Ukraine crisis, but a new relationship with the United States, while the Ukraine crisis might, or most likely will be, dealt with in a second or a separate track. But let's continue reading. Regarding the Ukraine agenda, at the proposal of the United States, there was a principal agreement to hold top-level bilateral meeting in the coming days, which means a meeting between President Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. So Mr. Ushakov claims it was the United States that proposed this. Together with our American colleagues, we are about to start working on the specific parameters of this meeting and its venue. Basically, the venue has also been coordinated, and we will communicate on this point a little later. It seems of now as if it would be the United Arab Emirates where this might happen, since Mr. Putin also had a meeting with the leader of the UAE, and they seem to be willing and ready to host the meeting, although it is not yet completely confirmed. As for the option of holding a trilateral meeting, which for some reason became a subject of speculation yesterday in Washington, the US representative simply mentioned it during the meeting at the Kremlin. However, there was no specific discussion on this topic. Russia has not commented on this option in any way. Our suggestion primarily focuses on preparing for a bilateral meeting with Donald Trump. It is our belief that ensuring this meeting is a success and yields tangible results is what matters most. Everyone already knows that Donald Trump spoke to several of his European partners on the phone to discuss these issues after Steve Witkoff reported back to him. It is worth noting in this regard that we have also been updating our close partners and friends through the relevant communication channels to inform them about the topics discussed during the meeting with Steve Witkoff. Let me point out that most likely the relevant parties he's talking about here are the Chinese, probably also Belarus and the immediate friends of Russia, but I would think that this points to the Russians immediately briefing the Chinese, because we know by now how important Russia and Vladimir Putin think of the relationship with China, and that any such negotiations would necessarily be not coordinated but informed with Beijing in order to reassure Beijing that what is going to happen. The last thing Russia would want is create any kind of doubt or suspicion in China about the future course of action of also their cooperation, which naturally but also is impacted by anything that Russia negotiates with the United States. Let's not forget the United States is trying to break Russia and China apart. It already in the past tried to tell China that it must completely change its relationship with Russia in order to have better relations with Washington. And it would only be natural for Beijing to suppose that the Americans will tell the Russians that they need to change their relationship with China in order to have better relations with them. And I suppose that this kind of suspicion is something that Russia would want to root out from the very beginning when it comes to their partnership with China. Last paragraph on what Ushakov said. Next week was suggested as a possible time frame for holding the meeting, but since the effort to prepare for this important event is only just beginning for both parties, it is hard to say how long the preparations will take. That said, the option of holding this meeting sometime next week was on the table, and we hold quite a positive view in this regard. So this is a highly positive, positively phrased statement by the top aide of Vladimir Putin, and Vladimir Putin then himself also a few hours later gave a short press conference while in the context of the meeting with the leader of the UAE. And of course, as you can see here, the reporters, they were asking Vladimir Putin immediately about this rumored meeting. Question: given the recent news about your upcoming meeting with President Trump, who initiated it? And President Putin very diplomatically answers, both sides expressed interest. At this point, who reached out first is no longer relevant. I take it also in the context of the Ushakov statement that it was probably the United States in the end who initiated this or asked for this, but that Vladimir Putin at this point tries to to avoid at all and any costs to humiliate Donald Trump and to not weaken his position, and therefore he himself will refrain from this question, which, and I agree with him, doesn't matter anymore for the concrete outcome that probably the Russians are looking for. It must be said, and it was criticized on other channels, that the Russians are not good at public diplomacy, and that by not stating who asked for this meeting, the Russians are kind of handing the ball to the Americans, and now the Trump administration will just claim that it was Russia, and that the U.S. media is now claiming, and the U.S. neocons are claiming, that his peace through strength and all of the threats of bone-crushing sanctions and the tariffs on trade with China and with India is actually working, and that it is the Russians that are coming to the negotiating table. And yes, this kind of narrative, the we win, they lose, because they're begging for a meeting. Yes, that narrative is now out there in the blogosphere and mainstream media, but I interpret this as not an issue to the Russian leadership. They simply don't care about public opinion in the West, because public opinion against Russia has been already at an all-time low for the better part of a decade, and only gone worse over the last 3 or 4 years. So why would they care? Why would they make a point about it? It is probably more important to the Russian leadership to not in any way, shape or form undermine the position of Donald Trump. On the contrary, it might be even good if ambiguity about these kind of superfluous points, who started it, if that strengthens Donald Trump's position, because if somebody on this planet is aware about the limits of the powers of the US presidency, it's probably the Russian president, who time and again said it's really hard to negotiate with any kind of with any US leader. He negotiated with many of them because they say one thing, they make an agreement with you on one day, then they go back, then they get visited by the people with the black neckties, and then they change their tune. So Vladimir Putin is intimately aware of the fact that Donald Trump is only one wheel in the machinery that is the United States. He's an important wheel, a very important wheel, but you would naturally not want to undercut the strength of that wheel if you think that you might be able to use that to get to an end that is beneficial, right? So I interpret his answer here as actually trying to strengthen the hand of Donald Trump, because there is a hope, maybe not an expectation, but a hope that something positive might come out of this process. And I repeat again, Vladimir Putin, just like Xi Jinping, are people who don't think in headlines, they think in processes. What is a beneficial process and what's a negative process? And then you try to influence what's going on and how things can go forward, right? So the question of who started it, who asked for it, is headline grabbing, and probably important for people to claim these little victories, but that's not what the Russians are about. Next question, asked to Vladimir Putin. Could you clarify, please? Your aide, Yuri Ushakov, mentioned that the meeting will likely happen next week. Do you have any details on the location, even just a hint? Vladimir Putin, we have many friends willing to help organize such events. One of them is the president of the United Arab Emirates. The exact venue is still being decided, but the UAE would be one of the suitable options. So it's not clear yet, but okay, seems like the UAE might be the place. Also, maybe it's just this coincidence that he was meeting with the UAE on that day, and I mean, why not? The one thing that he needs to be careful of is that it needs to be a country where he can actually travel to without the ICC arrest warrant kicking in. I believe the UAE is suitable, but I would need to look that up actually. Another question, what about Zelensky? Will you be meeting with him? And Vladimir Putin answers, I have said repeatedly that I have no objections to meeting with him in principle. It is possible, but certain conditions must be in place first. Unfortunately, we are still far away from that point. So, again, Vladimir Putin being extremely diplomatic and trying not to ruin anything that maybe Donald Trump on his end is trying to use speech acts that he's trying to use in order to sell the idea of this meeting to his camp and to the neocons. Pivotal to me also that Mr. Ushakov said there was an offer made. So something in the discussion with Mr. Witkov, Witkov might have said we are ready and willing to negotiate about these issues. Otherwise, it makes no point there is no point for Vladimir Putin to meet. And I said this yesterday, and I'm going to say it again. The red lines, not the red lines, sorry, the demands from the Russian side are pretty clear. They were laid out in this June 14th, 2024 presidential, the address of Vladimir Putin to his foreign policy staff. Ukraine troops must be completely withdrawn from Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia within the administrative borders. And there needs to be a commitment for Ukraine not to join NATO. Again, I repeat that this agreement that was struck back then was actually called an agreement on the neutrality and security guarantees for Ukraine. So, in my view, the most realistic thing that the United States could offer to Russia in order to say, like, let's meet and we might be willing to sign this as an outcome, is the promise to not include Ukraine in NATO, which would be the major concession to Russia that Russia was looking for the longest time, a de facto neutralization of Ukraine. The 4 oblasts are also non-negotiable, but the process of getting there might be something that Russia is probably willing to discuss, and maybe if such promises are made on both sides, and then we could be looking at a process leading to a ceasefire and a process then leading to a settlement of the Ukraine crisis. But again, the Ukraine crisis is something that the Russians have said repeatedly, and that's again part of this communique, is not the only issue that they are considering when negotiating with or having a talks about a partnership or a relationship with the United States. The US-Russian relations is something that Moscow would like to work on also separately from the war in Ukraine, and the war being just one of several issues that they are looking to have a discussion with the US about. And it seems to me that the hope on Moscow's side is that since some sort of concession, some sort of very important concession came from the United States, it is now the time to try to use a top-level meeting in order to push forward a positive process that will be in the interest of maybe de-escalating the war on the one hand and bringing it to an end, but on the other hand also have more relationship with the US. And I must say, people sometimes think that Russia can just win on the battlefield, and Russia is currently winning on the battlefield, but there's a very big difference between winning battles, winning a war, and then also winning the peace. Just getting to Kiev and just getting to the Dnieper, just getting to Kiev, just defeating the Ukrainian army, even if it is a NATO army, doing just that is one thing. And it is a difficult thing to achieve, and the Russian army is currently on the way of getting there, slowly but steadily. But getting to a condition where you can then again lay down the weapons for good and not also have then guerrilla warfare breaking out and the West then funneling small weapons into Western Ukraine and suicide attacks on police stations, preventing that kind of Afghanization of Ukraine that is very much in the interest of Russia, and that is very difficult to achieve, or almost impossible in a country as big as Ukraine, even with the entire military might of Russia. A territory as large as Ukraine, trying to prevent smuggling and trying to prevent this kind of guerrilla warfare is almost impossible. Just look at how the Hamas in Gaza was able to still get weapons and use weapons, even if it was pinpricks, even if they didn't win the war against Israel. The fact that they were able to have these weapons and ammunitions fighting against not only the Israelis but the Americans as well just shows you how difficult it is, even for a military with overwhelming might and overwhelming control over a territory, to subdue guerrilla warfare. And preventing that from happening is very much in the interest of Russia, and that's very much something that needs negotiation, at least to some extent. Now, on the American side, preventing total loss of face through losing Ukraine from the Donald Trump's incentive to not have Ukraine to be his Afghanistan, and having lost Ukraine is also an overwhelming incentive. The spoilers in this entire affair is, as always, probably going to be the neocons, which of course have an interest in continuing the war, which of course have an interest in bleeding Russia out, and would have an interest in transforming this war of army against army, nation against nation, into a Afghanistan. And Hillary Clinton said so several times. The neocons say so time and time again. We can bleed Russia out, and using asymmetric tactics is something that is being talked about in these think tanks for the last years. So the question at the moment to me is whether the two political leaders, or the leaderships of Russia and the United States, find this common ground to actually try to work together against those who would want to prolong the war. And let me be clear about this. It's not just the neocons in the US. It's also, of course, the Ukrainians, especially the right-wing sector, right, who has an interest in prolonging this, in not giving up, and the Europeans too. All of them are panicking. By the way, right now they're panicking about also the fact that nobody wants them at the table, right? That Donald Trump is willing to agree to just a bilateral meeting and no meeting with the no Europeans at the table, no Zelensky at the table. They are completely shut out again. And of course, this is what happens because here we have two superpowers talking with each other and actually thinking about creating a framework agreement that then later on, of course, naturally would need a lot of detailed negotiations. And Mr. Putin already hinted at that. But apparently Mr. Putin is willing to now entertain the idea of a direct meeting to get to a framework that would push the process forward. And the Europeans are panicking. When I say, though, that the Ukrainians are against this, what I mean is certain elites in the political process of Ukraine, and of course the ultra right-wing nationalists, the neo-Nazis, basically, who are dead set on fighting to the last Ukrainian. That is not true for the entirety of Ukraine. The opposite is the case, coincidentally, and I think this is a coincidence because it takes a lot of time. Yesterday is also the day when a new study came out from Gallup, this US American polling agency on Ukrainian support for the war, which is now collapsing. And I do not think this is timed. I do think because these opinion polls take a long time to do and collect and to do them properly. So I think, and they were obviously, they've been in the making for a long time because they have data points for several years. You can see here, Ukrainians lose appetite for war, support negotiated peace. Look at that. In 2022, you had over 70% saying that Ukraine should continue fighting until it wins the war. And the number of people who say that by now in 2024 has gone down to 24%. In 2025, it's 24% who still say that. 69% are now saying Ukraine should seek to negotiate an ending to the war as soon as possible. So, when I say that Ukraine is against a negotiated settlement, I don't mean the Ukrainians. It is obvious by now that the large majority of Ukrainians just wants this to end, which is also the most natural thing in the world to happen. The people who are struck most by violence are usually the ones who want the violence to end, even if it means accepting what still was thought of as unacceptable only a little bit prior. It is usually the people who are least affected by the death and destruction who are the most belligerent, which also explains why the Europeans are against all and any negotiations. And probably if we looked within Ukraine, my guess would be that Western Ukraine, the less affected parts, would be much more in favor of continuing the war. And the closer we get to the front lines, the more people are affected, the more they are in favor of just let's stop the goddamn bloodbath. So, in fact, we now have the constellation, at least on the ground, if this moved forward and if we had some form of process, which in the end would also include, let's say, a popular vote in Ukraine in order a referendum in order to kind of legitimize whatever is going to happen next. Let's say, for instance, just for instance, if the Americans and the Russians agree that these four oblasts are Russian from now on, and that you need Ukraine to accept this, and the Ukrainians put this to a vote on a national referendum on whether or not to accept the border change officially de jure, that we now might be in a situation in which maybe a majority of people would actually even vote yes on such a proposal in order to not prolong the war. So we have a completely different environment now inside Ukraine, outside Ukraine. There is still a very big risk, though. The big risk is, of course, that these negotiations do not come to fruition, that these negotiations or that the meeting between Vladimir Putin and Mr. Trump go poorly, that Mr. Trump actually has demands or changes his mind, that something that Mr. Putin will not say yes to. I mean, that they will walk away from this meeting, and Mr. Trump will pretend to be very angry and will then say like, now the bone crashing sanctions and now more money for Ukraine, $55 billion that have already been readied and could be passed by the next session of Congress in September, and that this meeting could then be this pivotal point. Alexander Mercury was pointing this out, could be this pivotal event that could sell to Trump's base the idea that, the Russians are just not willing to give anything, the Russians are just not willing to end the war. And if the meeting ends poorly, then this would be obviously the way that the Americans would frame it, and it could justify more escalation. At this point, though, I must say the sheer fact that the Russians are willing to take that risk and that the Russians are willing to give it another try to negotiate and have this meeting with Donald Trump means to me that in terms of processes, they do think that this will or might contribute to something good coming out of it, even if it is not the termination of the war soon, but something positive is what what Moscow thinks could happen, all while still briefing the Chinese, still making sure that the realities on the battleground, the battleground realities do not change to their disfavor. And again, I mean, at this point, the Russians have achieved the Americans to ask for a meeting with them without having a ceasefire. I mean, and the Russians said there will be no ceasefire. We are willing to talk. We are willing to sit down, but we will do both at the same time. We will do the military approach, which we have been doing, and we are ready to do diplomacy. It was the Americans who said that ceasefire must come first, and then we talk. And well, that has changed. I mean, that has changed. So the sheer fact that the Americans are now willing to talk directly and have a meeting with Mr. Putin without the ceasefire, to me, implies that the situation is deteriorating and that this is one more attempt at actually kind of changing the course of, at least for the Americans, the course of the narrative. Because the narrative, if the Russians break through, if the Russians get to the Dnieper, if Russia then starts the permanent occupation of eastern Ukraine, is definitely going to be a loss of faith and a loss for Donald Trump. So it might be a ruse, it might be a trick. It is possible that the United States and that the Trump administration is playing another diplomatic trick, because they've been doing so quite a lot. Think of Iran, think of the way that they pretended to be negotiating when they were actually preparing an attack. It's possible, it's absolutely possible. But that means that if that is true, that the Russians are now falling for a trick, I would think that they've thought this through quite thoroughly and thought through the offer that Mr. Witkoff made, and also considered the U.S. internal political dynamic that probably tells them that now is the time to say yes to such an opportunity to influence the process. That's it from me for today. Thank you for your attention.